On the 9th of October 1963, a mountain fell into a reservoir in the Italian Alps. The dam did not break. The Vajont Dam is still there. You can walk across the top of it today, and the concrete is essentially as it was. The structure took the entire event and held. Nearly 2,000 people died anyway in about 4 minutes. So this is not a film about a dam failing. It is about everything that was written down, signed, softened, or quietly not sent, while the one component anybody had actually tested did exactly what it was built to do. Consider what they had actually built. The Vajont Dam was briefly the tallest in the world, 261.6 meters from foundation to crest, wedged into a gorge so narrow it is only 190 meters across at the top. It is a doubly curved arch. It does not hold the water back by being heavy. It holds it back by pushing the load sideways into the rock of the valley walls, the way a stone archway carries a cathedral. At the crest, the wall is 3.4 meters thick, thinner than a small room is wide. The engineering was never the problem. The designer was an engineer named Carlo Semenza, and his dam is the reason we are still arguing about this, because it survived to be argued about. An arch dam pushes its load into the valley walls, so the question that decides whether it is safe is not really about concrete. It is about the mountain. And the mountain had been raising objections from the start. In 1948, the consulting geologist, Giorgio Dal Piaz, was asked about raising the reservoir higher than planned. He wrote back, "I must confess that I tremble at the very thought of the new perspectives." 9 years later, the company applied to build higher still, and a geological report was required. Dal Piaz wrote to Semenza asking him to send the text. "Kindly send me the text you told me about," which I found impeccable. Semenza sent it with a note indicating the date the report should carry. The document certifying the mountain was written, in substantial part, by the people who wanted to build on it. The company then hired a young geologist to survey the slope properly. His name was Edoardo Semenza. He was Carlo Semenza's son. Through 1959 and 1960, he found what nobody had reported. The entire flank of Monte Toc was an ancient landslide. It had already failed once in prehistory, and it was sitting there re-cemented directly above the new lake. He wrote it up with his colleague Franco Giudici in June 1960. If the sliding plane were inclined even slightly toward the reservoir, they said, the movement could be reactivated by the presence of water, with consequences that were, in their words, currently highly unpredictable. Before it was filed, his father read it and wrote to him, "If ever you had to soften any of your assertions, it won't certainly be the end of the world." The report went to the company, and according to the official chronology, it was never submitted to the control authorities at all. It was not ignored. It was commissioned, received, discussed, treated as a hypothesis needing more work, and then it simply stopped moving upward. The mountain did not wait for the paperwork. In November 1960, with the reservoir filling, 700,000 cubic meters broke off the slope and dropped into the lake. Above it, a fissure opened across the mountainside in the shape of an enormous letter M, about 2 kilometers long. That was not a crack. It was an outline, the exact perimeter of the mass that would move 3 years later, drawn on the mountain in advance, at full scale, where anyone on the road could see it. Edoardo Semenza measured what it enclosed. He later told the investigating judge he had put the unstable mass at about 2 kilometers long, roughly 250 million cubic meters, and between 100 and 250 meters thick. He was almost exactly right in 1960. So the company did something that sounds entirely responsible. They commissioned a physical model. A 1 to 200 scale reproduction of the reservoir was built at a hydraulic center near Vittorio Veneto, run through the University of Padua under Professor Augusto Getty. They dropped landslides into the model lake and measured the waves. Out of it came a number. Keep the reservoir at or below 700 meters above sea level, and the valley is safe. There were 2 problems with that number. The first is what the model was asked. The tests failed the eastern and western halves of the slope separately, and comparatively slowly. Nobody modeled the whole mass coming down at once. The second is who was asking. The steering committee of that center included 4 representatives of the company that owned the dam and Professor Getty's own brother. The people who lived there had worked it out without a model. A reporter for the newspaper, Luneta named Tina Merlin, wrote about the danger the reservoir posed to the villages of the Erto Valley. In 1959, she was prosecuted for it, for spreading false, exaggerated, tendentious news. Her trial ended in November 1960, weeks after the mountain dropped 700,000 cubic meters into the lake. Witnesses from Erto testified, photographs were produced. She was acquitted, and the verdict recorded why there is nothing false, exaggerated, or biased in the article. She had been right in a national newspaper 3 years early, and a court had said so out loud. In March 1963, the operator applied to raise the water to 715 meters. Getty's limit was 700. The application was for 15 meters above the only number anybody had tested for. On the 30th of March, the ministry's dams department granted it. The testing commission, the body whose job was to sign off on exactly this, had not met. There was no written approval from it because there was nobody left convened to write one. The third and final filling began on April 11th. By now, the slope was instrumented. Survey points were read continuously, and from early September 1963, they never stopped climbing. On September 2nd, the survey points moved 6.5 millimeters. By the 15th, they were moving 12 millimeters a day. By the 26th, that had risen to 22. On the 2nd and 3rd of October, it reached 40. On the 2nd of September, the mayor of Erto and Casso wrote to the operator, copied to the ministry, asking for reassurance so that the inhabitants of the villages could stop living in a nightmare. In the ministry's archives, no trace of that letter remains. On the 27th of September, they began lowering the reservoir to take the load off. Present-day analysis of those filling and drawdown cycles suggests that lowering the lake was itself part of what was destabilizing the slope. That was not understood at the time. The readings kept climbing. On the 9th of October, workers eating lunch on the crest could see the mountain moving with the naked eye. That morning, the engineer in charge wrote to his colleague, "The cracks, the holes in the road, the trees leaning, all of this makes us think the worst." He ended the letter, "May God bless us all." At 10 to 6 that evening, he telephoned one of the consulting professors and described the situation. The professor told him, "I highly recommend to stay calm and not think too far ahead." The survey points moved 200 millimeters that day, nearly a foot. At 22:39, the mountain went. 260 million cubic meters of rock entered the lake, and it did not come down as an eastern half and a western half. The chronology is explicit, not in 2 parts, but as a whole compact mass. The single case the model had never run. The reservoir level at that moment was 700.42 meters. They had drawn it down almost exactly to the safe number. It made no difference. The water had nowhere to go but up and out. Around 50 million cubic meters went over the top of the dam and down the other side. 1,910 stones stand in the cemetery at Fortogna, 1 for each victim. The counts differ between sources because more than half of the dead were never recovered, and of everything human beings had built in that valley. One object came through the night undamaged, Carlo Semenza's dam. He never saw it. He had died of a cerebral hemorrhage 2 years earlier and was later cleared by the court of any responsibility. The trial was moved 400 kilometers south to L'Aquila on the grounds that a local jury could not be impartial. 2 men were convicted. After appeals, the sentences were 5 years and 3 years and 8 months, with 3 years pardoned in each case. One defendant took his own life before the verdict. Another had already died. The professor who ran the scale model was acquitted. The final ruling came about 2 weeks before the case would have expired under the statute of limitations. Longerone's compensation was settled in 1999. 36 years. So here's what the dam is for, now that it holds nothing back. It is the only part of that system that was ever tested to destruction. And it passed. The report was never sent upward. The model was never asked the real question. The commission stopped meeting. The letter left no trace. The journalist was prosecuted and then proved right, and nothing changed. Every one of those was a load path too. Nobody ever checked what they could carry.